Jack the Ripper, the mysterious serial killer whose identity has long remained a mystery.
That is.
Until now.
For over 130 years, his name has haunted the darkest corners of history, Jack the Ripper. But in 2025, a simple blood-stained shawl and a single strand of DNA sparked a global firestorm. Did science finally unmask the world's most infamous killer? Or are we chasing shadows built on myth and flawed evidence? This isn't just a murder mystery, it's a story of truth, trauma, and the terrifying cost of getting it wrong. Like, subscribe, and follow us as we unravel the case that refuses to die. The Autumn of Fear, 1888. It began in the shadows. In the damp, narrow alleys of Whitechapel, London, the air in late August 1888 hung heavy with coal smoke and desperation. But what would unfold over the next few months would transcend crime. It would become myth. A series of murders, each more brutal than the last, would terrify the most powerful empire in the world. And with each body left behind, one name carved itself into the collective memory of mankind: Jack the Ripper. Victorian London was a city of contrast, gaslit affluence in the west, festering poverty in the east. Nowhere was that disparity more vivid than in Whitechapel. Cramped tenements, open sewers, and starving families made survival a daily battle. Amid this chaos, women, often alone, impoverished, and invisible, sold themselves to get by. Their names would soon be known not for how they lived, but for how they died. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly, known collectively today as the Canonical Five. These women lived hard lives and met violent ends. Found in the early hours of the morning, their throats were slashed with terrifying precision. Some were mutilated, organs removed. These were not random killings. They were deliberate, controlled, surgical. Whoever did this wasn't simply killing. He was making a statement. As the bodies piled up, fear swept through Whitechapel. But it wasn't just the murders, it was the method. The attacker struck swiftly, then vanished. The precision of the cuts, the removal of internal organs, and the silence of witnesses baffled even seasoned detectives. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was practiced, purposeful. Londoners panicked. Women refused to walk alone. Men formed patrols, and the Metropolitan Police were scrambling. There were no fingerprints, no surveillance, no real forensic tools. Only speculation, sketches, and a sea of shadows. Then the letters came, one after another. Handwritten notes addressed to newspapers, and the police signed by a chilling moniker: Jack the Ripper. One letter, famously known as the From Hell letter, arrived with half a human kidney preserved in a box. No one could prove if the letters were real, but it didn't matter. The psychological warfare had begun. The press fed the hysteria, printing the letters in full, stoking public terror, and selling papers by the tens of thousands. The Ripper became more than a suspect, he became a symbol. A ghost haunting London's underbelly. On the 9th of November, 1888, the fear reached its zenith. Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest of the 5 victims and the only one murdered indoors, was found in her tiny room, mutilated beyond recognition. Her body was nearly unrecognizable, organs scattered, her face flayed. Even hardened officers reportedly wept at the scene. It was an execution of such violence that even the tabloid-hardened public fell silent. This wasn't just a killing, it was a dissection. It was ritualistic, intentional, and then it stopped. No more letters, no more bodies, just an eerie, all-consuming silence. The police, under immense pressure from Queen Victoria herself, had nothing. Hundreds had been interviewed, dozens detained. Scotland Yard had run in circles. The Ripper had mocked them, outwitted them, and disappeared. There were rumors, theories, suspects, but nothing stuck. The killer had vanished, but his shadow lingered over Whitechapel like a shroud. In the absence of a conviction, Jack the Ripper became immortal. He was no longer just a man, he was a symbol of everything broken in Victorian society. The cruelty of poverty, the invisibility of women, the limits of power. Over time, theories multiplied. Suspects grew into legends, and the mystery deepened. But what no one knew then, what not even the most experienced detectives could foresee, was that the name of one man had already been quietly entered into their secret files. A man no one remembered. A man who would be locked away, his story fading until science would pull him from the shadows. His name was Aaron Kosminski, and over a century later, he would return. Not through confession, but through blood. The barber in the mist, in the fog-choked streets of Whitechapel, he was barely noticed. He stood quietly near doorways, his shadow flickering in the lamplight, the sound of scissors snapping faintly beneath the hum of a restless city. He blended in with the thousands who called this part of East London home. But among the crumbling walls and whispers of fear, one name appeared again and again, softly, cautiously, and always with unease: Aaron Kosminski. At the time, no one realized how close the monster might have been. Whitechapel in the 1882nd was not a place of hope, it was survival at best. With over 76,000 people crammed into its narrow lanes, the neighborhood was a crucible of crime, disease, and ethnic tension. It was also a haven for immigrants, many of them Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms and persecution in Eastern Europe. Among them was a quiet, wiry young man named Aaron Mordecai Kosminski, later shortened in records to Kosminski. He was just another face in the crowd, another man looking for a future in a city that wanted him invisible. Born in 1865 in the town of Klodawa, Poland, Aaron Kosminski arrived in London sometime in the early 1882nd. He was likely in his late teens when he settled with family in the heart of Whitechapel, where he worked as a barber, a profession requiring calm hands and sharp blades. But beneath his ordinary life lay shadows. Kosminski's behavior was erratic. His mental state, documented by those around him, began deteriorating soon after his arrival. He heard voices. He believed people were trying to harm him. He refused to eat food prepared by others. He was deeply misogynistic, according to police notes, and he had a growing reputation for instability. Still, he was not violent, at least, not yet. As the Ripper murders shook Whitechapel, Kosminski's name quietly surfaced in the police's internal memos. Scotland Yard, under intense pressure, began compiling lists of potential suspects, and in a secret document dated 1894, Assistant Chief Constable Sir Melville Macnaughton named Aaron Kosminski as one of 3 serious suspects. The memo described him as having a great hatred of women, with strong homicidal tendencies. And another senior officer, Inspector Donald Swanson, later annotated a private copy of a memoir by the lead investigator, confirming that Kosminski had been placed under surveillance and even identified in a secret police lineup. But there was a problem. No one was willing to testify. The only known eyewitness, a fellow Jewish immigrant, refused to speak out, afraid of inciting anti-Semitic violence against the local community. With no confession, no witnesses, and no physical evidence, the case could go no further. Kosminski walked free. In the years following the murders, Kosminski's condition worsened dramatically. He began wandering the streets in silence, refusing to bathe or speak. His sisters pleaded for help, and in 1891, after threatening a family member with a knife during one of his hallucinations, Aaron Kosminski was committed to Colney Hatch Asylum, one of the most notorious psychiatric hospitals in England. Medical records describe him as suffering from auditory hallucinations, delusions of persecution, and chronic mania. He reportedly believed that he was being fed through wires and that spirits were controlling him. He refused all food unless he could prepare it himself. He remained institutionalized for nearly 3 decades. Locked away in asylums until his death, Kosminski faded from public consciousness. He died in 1919 from gangrene in his leg, alone, forgotten, and buried in a pauper's grave. But the suspicion never fully disappeared. For those few in the know, detectives, archivists, and obsessive ripperologists, his name was a ghost attached to one of the darkest legends in modern history. Still, with no hard proof, Kosminski remained just another face in a crowd of suspects, until a piece of cloth would drag him, silently and violently, back into the light. For over a century, Kosminski's story was a footnote, interesting, disturbing, but ultimately inconclusive. Without modern forensics, there was no way to tie him definitively to the crimes. Police had no motive, no DNA, no evidence that could survive the test of time. And even the officers who had once whispered his name seemed to let the theory die with them. But in 2007, a forgotten artifact emerged at auction, a shawl, bloodstained, mysterious, and allegedly found near the body of Catherine Eddowes. What seemed like a morbid souvenir was, in fact, a time capsule. Inside it lay the possibility of something Scotland Yard never had. A link, a trace, a testable remnant of history. And this time, the evidence wouldn't speak through rumor. It would speak through science. Aaron Kosminski's name would be thrust back into the global spotlight, in a way no one expected, not through old reports, not through blurry photographs or faded handwriting, but through his bloodline. In the next chapter, we unravel the controversy that shook the scientific world and reignited the most infamous cold case in history, starting with a shawl, a biologist, and a claim that would divide the globe. The shawl that changed everything. It wasn't a knife. It wasn't a diary. It wasn't even a letter. What reignited the Jack the Ripper case more than a century later was something ordinary, soft, foldable, forgettable. A shawl tucked away in private hands for generations. This simple piece of cloth, stained, aged, and woven in mystery, would become the centerpiece of the most explosive forensic claim in modern true crime history. And for a moment, the world believed the case was finally closed. In 2007, an unusual item surfaced at auction, a silk and wool shawl purportedly recovered from the crime scene of Catherine Eddowes, the fourth known Ripper victim. She was murdered in the early hours of the 30th of September, 1888, her body grotesquely mutilated, her kidney removed. According to family lore, the shawl was taken from the scene by Sergeant Amos Simpson, a policeman who wanted to gift it to his wife. She allegedly refused the blood-soaked item, and it was instead packed away and passed down as a macabre heirloom. Skepticism followed it like a shadow. There was no police report proving the shawl's presence at the crime scene. No photographs, no chain of custody. But there was something else. Curiosity. And one man was determined to turn that into something more. Russell Edwards, a British businessman and true crime enthusiast, purchased the shawl with a single, audacious goal: to prove the identity of Jack the Ripper once and for all. To do this, he enlisted Dr. Jari Luolainen, a molecular biologist with expertise in ancient and forensic DNA analysis. Together, they believed that modern science could do what 19th century detectives could not: extract a name from history's most enduring mystery. They weren't interested in theories. They wanted proof. The plan was simple on paper, but nearly impossible in practice. Luolainen used a combination of ultraviolet light scanning, microscopy, and mass spectrometry to examine the shawl. Under the scope, he found what he believed to be traces of blood and, more shockingly, semen. He tested for mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, a type of DNA inherited through the maternal line. While not as precise as nuclear DNA, mtDNA can be preserved over centuries and matched to living descendants. Luolainen then contacted relatives from both the Eddowes and Kosminski families. And when the DNA from the shawl matched both a maternal descendant of Eddowes and one of Kosminski's sister, the case seemed to break wide open. Was this it? Had they finally found Jack the Ripper? In 2014, Edwards and Luolainen publicly announced their findings. By 2019, the results were published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, lending an air of academic legitimacy to the claim. Then, in 2025, Edwards published Jack the Ripper, the definitive casebook, accompanied by media tours and television appearances. The world was captivated. Headlines screamed, "Jack the Ripper identified." News anchors debated the ethics of posthumous justice. Social media erupted with hashtags like #RipperUnmasked and #Kosminski confirmed. For many, this was the closure they had been waiting for. But for others, the celebration felt premature. In the days following the announcement, the case dominated international headlines. Documentaries were greenlit. Podcasts dissected every detail. Politicians weighed in. Even descendants of the Ripper's alleged victims spoke publicly, some calling for official recognition of the findings. It was unprecedented. a 137-year-old cold case being reopened by DNA extracted from a shawl older than the Eiffel Tower. Edwards claimed moral victory, calling it a triumph of science over myth. He argued that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. And for a brief moment, the world agreed. But science has rules, and as the dust settled, so did the questions. Supporters of the Kosminski theory declared the mystery solved. The DNA, they argued, was too specific to be coincidence. The fact that both the victim and the suspect's relatives matched samples from the same piece of fabric seemed conclusive. But skeptics, especially those in the scientific community, began to push back. They asked, where was the documented chain of custody for the shawl? Why hadn't Louhelainen released his full raw data? Could contamination over 130 years be ruled out? Worse yet, mtDNA wasn't unique, it could be shared by thousands. And no one could prove the shawl was even at the crime scene. Suddenly, the definitive casebook didn't feel so definitive. The shawl had changed everything. It had reignited the mystery, drawn fresh eyes to an ancient case, and reintroduced a forgotten man into global discourse. But it had also ignited a new fire, one of controversy, scientific division, and public doubt. If DNA couldn't solve this mystery, I could anything. In the next chapter, we dive deeper into the science and the storm it caused. The question isn't just whether the test was right, but whether the truth is even still findable at all. DNA and a divided scientific world. For a moment, it felt like the mystery was over. The Ripper had a name. The science had spoken. The public exhaled. But then the scientists spoke back. Within months of the explosive announcement linking Aaron Kosminski to the Ripper murders, the very foundation of that claim began to shake, not from emotional backlash, but from the unforgiving logic of scientific scrutiny. Because in the world of forensics, how you find something matters just as much as what you find. Setting the scene. In the aftermath of Russell Edwards and Dr. Jari Louhelainen's announcement, the global media framed the moment as historic. The Journal of Forensic Sciences had published the findings. Television networks hosted special segments. True crime podcasts released emergency episodes. But in academic circles, murmurs of concern quickly grew louder. DNA, especially mitochondrial DNA, teen DNA, can be powerful, but it's also delicate. And when extracted from an item with unclear origins, the whole house of cards can collapse. What followed wasn't just scientific debate. It was an all-out war for the truth. Dr. Turi King, the renowned geneticist known for identifying the remains of King Richard III, was one of the first to go public. She questioned the shawl's provenance, noting the complete absence of verified chain of custody. There's no documentation it was ever at the crime scene, she stated bluntly. Everything else becomes moot. Then came Dr. Walter Parson, a leading expert in forensic genetics. He didn't mince words either. Unpublishable nonsense, he called the study, citing a lack of transparency, missing raw data, and no replication. In science, if a result cannot be replicated, it is not a result. It's speculation. At the heart of the backlash was the nature of mtDNA itself. Unlike nuclear DNA, which is highly individual and found in the nucleus of each cell, mtDNA is passed down through the maternal line and shared by hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. In the late 19th century East End of London, an area filled with Jewish immigrants of similar heritage, matching mtDNA to a modern-day Kosminski relative didn't prove Aaron Kosminski committed the crime. It only proved that someone from his maternal line, possibly even a distant cousin, had come into contact with the shawl. Add to that the contamination risk. The shawl had passed through numerous hands: family members, collectors, auctioneers, scientists over 130 years, each one potentially leaving behind a genetic footprint. The more experts weighed in, the more the foundation of the Kosminski theory crumbled. One issue was methodology. Louhelainen had refused to publish his full DNA sequences. He declined peer requests to share protocols, and no other lab had independently verified his results. In 2024, the Journal of Forensic Sciences, which had originally published the study, issued an expression of concern, a formal warning that parts of the work could not be verified. That was the academic equivalent of a red flag waving in the middle of a crime scene. And yet Edwards and Luhalainen doubled down. They claimed that new techniques in controlled environments had minimized contamination. They insisted the shawl had been preserved carefully in a glass display case. They maintained that the match was too strong to be coincidence. But the tide was turning. The debate wasn't just happening in laboratories, it was unfolding in public. News outlets like Forbes, New Scientist, and Science ran critical editorials. One article titled, "Jack the Ripper Claim Dubbed Unpublishable Nonsense," went viral, fueling doubts. Twitter exploded with conflicting threads from amateur sleuths and PhDs alike. Public forums split into factions. Team DNA Truth. The case is solved. Science wins. Team Skeptic. This is bad science dressed up for headlines. Team Ripper Mythos. Maybe we were never meant to know. The very tool meant to end the mystery DNA had become a new battleground. By mid-2025, the question had changed. It was no longer, is Aaron Kosminski Jack the Ripper? It had become, can we ever know for sure? Despite growing criticism, Russell Edwards remained firm. He continued his book tour, gave interviews, and advocated for a formal inquest, hoping Parliament would officially name Kosminski as the most likely killer. Victims' families echoed the call, arguing for historical closure, not punishment. But forensic experts warned against emotional resolution built on shaky scientific ground. We are at risk of rewriting history to make ourselves feel better, one geneticist wrote. That's not truth. That's myth-making. The case hadn't been solved. It had been cracked open. And as doubts about Kosminski mounted, a familiar fog returned to the streets of London. Not the kind that clung to cobblestones in 1888, but the kind that clouds memory, motive, and meaning. If Kosminski wasn't the Ripper, who was? And if he was, why did it take a disputed shawl, a century-old myth, and a storm of controversy to declare it? In the final chapter, we explore the cost of a wrong answer, the cry for justice in 2025, and the shadows still haunting history's darkest alley. The danger of a wrong answer. What if they're wrong? What if Aaron Kosminski, this troubled, institutionalized man buried for over a century, is not the monster history wants him to be? In 2025, many claimed the Jack the Ripper case was solved. The DNA had spoken. The mystery had ended. But mysteries this dark, this enduring, don't go quietly. Because when history makes a mistake, it echoes. In the months following the controversial DNA revelation, a new emotion replaced excitement. Unease. The story had been compelling. A forgotten shawl. A modern test. A suspect long buried. It made sense. But sense isn't the same as certainty. Historians warned against retrofitting evidence to match conclusions. Forensic experts pointed out that a single contaminated item, preserved poorly and passed through unregulated hands, could never carry the weight of definitive proof. And then there were the voices we hadn't heard yet. Those of the living. The descendants of Catherine Eddowes, one of the canonical five, stepped into the spotlight. "We're not looking for revenge," said her great-great-granddaughter in a viral interview. "We just want the truth to be said out loud." For them, naming Kosminski wasn't about blame, it was about closure. About honoring pain passed down like inheritance. About ending a story that had haunted their family for generations. But for others, that truth felt built on fragile ground, including the descendants of Kosminski himself. Some remained silent. Others appeared visibly shaken in interviews. One quietly said, "If it's true, then we accept it. But I can't change what someone did over a century ago." Another refused to speak at all, unwilling to carry the burden of inherited guilt. The public wanted certainty, but what they got was conflict. The deeper problem wasn't just science. It was ethics. Aaron Kosminski was mentally ill. His documented delusions, social withdrawal, and eventual hospitalization paint a tragic picture not of a monster, but of a man unraveling. Branding him a serial killer without airtight evidence risks rewriting history into a courtroom without a defense. And in a time where mental health stigma still lingers, turning a vulnerable man into a mythic slayer may be more than misleading, it may be dangerous. The media loves neat resolutions. But history is rarely so kind. Even if the DNA evidence had been perfect, and it wasn't, it only linked Kosminski to a single victim, Catherine Eddowes. The other 4 canonical victims had no confirmed forensic ties to him. Some experts argue the murders weren't all committed by the same person. Elizabeth Stride, for example, was not mutilated like the others. The timing, locations, and methods suggest the chilling possibility that Jack the Ripper was not one killer but many. Or worse, that the crimes have been mythologized beyond recognition. Which raises a terrifying question. Did Jack the Ripper ever exist the way we imagine him? Or have we created him piece by piece out of fear, confusion, and a hunger for narrative? By late 2025, the debate had become cultural. A petition with tens of thousands of signatures called on the UK government to officially name Kosminski as the Ripper. Supporters cited DNA, police memos, and moral urgency. Critics fired back. Without clear evidence, it's not justice, it's vengeance masquerading as closure. Netflix announced a new docuseries. Whitechapel tour guides revised their scripts. Books flew off shelves. But amidst the media frenzy, the most haunting voices were the quietest. Historians, ethicists, and scientists who whispered, "Be careful." Because the danger isn't just naming the wrong man, it's needing to name someone so badly that we stop asking questions. If Aaron Kosminski wasn't the Ripper, then the damage is irreversible. A man already marginalized in life by poverty, ethnicity, and illness is now vilified in death. If he was, then we must reckon with how long it took to see the truth and whether we truly saw it or simply wanted it enough. Justice cannot be built on convenience, nor can truth. History, when twisted to suit a headline, becomes performance. And closure obtained on shaky ground may feel satisfying, but it will never be solid. So, where does that leave us? Back where we started in the fog. Jack the Ripper was never just a man. He was a mirror of misogyny, of poverty, of systemic failure, of what happens when society turns its eyes away from the most vulnerable. Science gave us a clue, but not an answer. Media gave us a name, but not the truth. And in the end, maybe the real danger isn't that we never solved the case. Maybe it's that we thought we did. So, what do you believe? Was Aaron Kosminski truly the face behind the myth? Or is the real Ripper still hiding somewhere deeper, darker, and harder to name? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more mysteries, revelations, and the haunting spaces between what we know and what we only think we do.